Xoro 1 or Xoro ERP Training 3. In this training, we're going to cover largely the purchasing modules. So I'll go over the different inventory levels. We'll talk about POs, how to receive POs with ASNs, some reporting, and we'll also go over some of the manufacturing order modules if that module applies to you. So let's dive right in. Okay, so I'm going to go to the Snapshot module. It's the first place I'm going to go to here. And Xoro has a lot of different inventory levels available to you that you can use. This is the inventory snapshot module. So this is probably the most common place that you'll go to see the different inventory in your system. So as you can see right now in my LA warehouse for this particular SKU, I have 313 on hand. If I were to enable the consolidated view, it's going to tell me across the board, in all my warehouses combined, I've got these many units on hand. So that's the difference between the consolidated view on and off. The advanced search here is just like the advanced search in all the centers, so you can filter out exactly the data that you're looking for, including the columns here as well that you can toggle on and off. So this is really similar to other centers that you'll see in the system. So let's talk about the different inventory levels. I'm going to start with available. So available is basically your inventory that's on your shelf. So in this case, I've got 301 units of available inventory in my LA warehouse for this particular SKU. Now that includes both unallocated and allocated inventory, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Not available is basically what you've got damaged. So in addition to the 301 units, I've got 12 units that are marked as not available. Now, these could be marked as not available for a variety of reasons. Maybe they just don't want to be sold. Maybe they're damaged. And an important note is this not available inventory, it actually can't be sold. So it won't be shown as sellable inventory when sales reps try to write up orders and they see that availability column. Now, if you sum up not available and available, so 301 plus 12, you'll get 313, which is your on-hand inventory level. So this is the inventory level that calculates actually your asset value of that particular SKU. So for example, 313 of on-hand at the LA warehouse, that's going to give you your asset transaction for the LA warehouse. Now, a couple other inventory levels that we'll talk about. Actually, drag these around a bit. Another one of note is in picking. So we talked about in training 2 how you can waive an order or allocate an order, and that's the same as basically in picking. So what that means is of the 301 units that I have on my shelf, 117 of those units have already been spoken for. They've already been waived. And so only the remaining of those units are actually truly available, and that is calculated by net available. So you take 301 from your shelf and you subtract from that 117, you're going to get 184. And that's your net available inventory that that you can actually sell to your customers. And that's actually the inventory that the inventory level that you'll see on the sales order module under the availability column. The next inventory level is on SO. And a lot of these inventory levels you can actually drill down into. So for example, this 163, I can actually click in and I can see all the orders that comprise that number. So I can see some sales and purchase history as well. I can basically see all the orders that belongs to. And of course, I can see those different inventory levels. Right, so on SO, I've got here 163. And that gives rise to the ATS inventory level. Now, what this ATS is basically your available minus your on SO. So it's saying that, okay, you have 301 units on your shelf, but you've written up 163 units on orders, and from that, you have 138 left. And it's important to note that this on SO column, this is calculating, it's summing up basically all the units that are released on a sales order. So this isn't including any shipped units or units that are on an open status for a sales order. So if you want this on SO, basically if you want your inventory to be affected by ATS, you'll want to make sure that you release your sales orders so that this on SO column is populated. Now on ATS including PO is simply ATS plus on PO. Now on PO is simply what's released on a vendor purchase order. So again, you can drill down into this and you can see what units I have on what POs. So in this case, 138 plus 58 gives me 196. So this is kind of like a forecasted inventory level, ATS including PO, because it's ATS plus on PO. So it's saying that basically if we were to receive these units in on the PO, this is what the ATS would look like. This is what it's forecasted to be. And the in receiving column, this is basically what units you have on an ASN. Now, an ASN is an advanced shipping notice, so it's actually the receiving document that we're going to use to receive a purchase order in. So just like with a sales order, you create a waive on it in order to ship it out. Similarly, on the purchasing side of things, you create an ASN on a vendor PO, and you actually receive that ASN to make that inventory live. So I can see here, if I click on this, for instance, I can see here the units 3 and 1 for these two ASNs. And there's a lot of different inventory levels that we've covered, so you can actually see some help articles that define them again for us. So I can say, I can pull up this article, for instance, what do all the different inventory levels mean? And it's going to describe to me basically just what we went through. What do they all mean? How are they all calculated? And so on. Now let's head on over to the short inventory planner. So this module, it's going to look really, really similar to the snapshot module that we were just on. The only difference here is it's going to show you all items that the system is calculating as short. So this is really good to see what your demand is in the system, and since it's driven by largely what you have available on your shelf and what you've written up on release sales orders, it's going to calculate for you automatically a recommended value, a quantity to order. So this is really good to kind of do your planning for all your purchasing. You'll be largely using this module to do that. And it can include even reorder points. So if you have reorder data uploaded into your system, entered into your system, that says that, okay, well, once a unit reaches 5 units at this warehouse, then you want to order 20 more and so on. So that reorder information, if it's been uploaded, you can actually include that in your calculation for your to order quantity here. A handy thing I find is, because this is a module that's really similar to other centers, I can use filtering. So I could say, okay, well, find me all the items that have this style. And I can see you've got some here. So let me actually create some. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these 3 lines. Let's say I want to cut a PO for these 3 lines here. And let's say I want to adjust these quantities a bit. I want to say 5 units. I want to order 20 here, and then 6. So now I'm going to click on options, and I have a couple options. I can create a new PO with these 3 items. I can create a new transfer PO, which we'll talk about in a bit, or I can add these lines to an existing PO. So if I click on create new PO, I simply select my vendor, and I go add to PO. Click OK. Here we go. So it's going to take me to the PO module, the purchase order module, with those lines automatically fetched in, along with the quantities that I had specified. So you can see here that this is the purchase order module. It looks really, really similar to the sales order module, and we've done that intentionally. And you can see the header level fields here. So basically your order date, your delivery dates, make sure to select your vendor and correctly select the warehouse that you're receiving these goods into. And the other info tab just has some optional fields here as well, including terms and some shipping fields. And on the bottom are the detail, all the lines of your PO. So a lot of the features that are available on the sales order module, which you can definitely check out if you want to see some of those features in detail, I'll briefly gloss over here as well. So for example, batch discounts, any custom pricing, you can delete selected rows. Of course, the variant finder and then both the add item as well. So they're both available here. And of course, you can enter memos, vendor messages, and the totals at the very bottom here. So I'm going to click on Save to save my PO. There we go. We've got our PO number at the top here and an open status. I can go to the Purchase Order Center where all the POs live. Right, so you're quite familiar probably with the Purchase Order Center by now, or at least centers in general, how they behave. I'm going to open up this PO just because we're going to edit it now. And let's show you some of the features that are available on this PO. So again, they're quite similar to the sales order features. You can release a PO, which we'll talk about in just a sec. You can void a PO, which will permanently delete it. Cancel it, which will still keep it in the system, and then also close it as well, which will keep it in the system. So, for instance, if you have a PO that's partially received, you may, and there's no more shipments to be received on it anymore, you can close it out, which will still keep it in the system. It'll just change the status to closed. Voiding will permanently delete it, so you want to be very wary before voiding a PO. And of course, you have your duplicate feature, which will duplicate a PO. You can move selected lines to an existing PO. This is similar to the corresponding feature in the sales order module. And of course, the emailing functionality is the same as well. So you can click on Add the Email Queue, and of course, the same emailing options are available there. You can have a look in the Training 2 sales order video if you want to see in depth how to actually send an email out from your Xoro system. So you have the email option. You can copy to sales order, so you can create a sales order with these 3 lines as well. So those are all the options that are available to you. In addition, the commenting feature is still available as well, so you can click on this. So you can basically mention your peers, and this is a good way to log all that conversation. The attachments tab, you can use this to basically drag and drop any attachments that you wanted. So again, this commenting feature is available on all the different modules in the system. So let's go ahead, let's release this PO. And what that means is basically when you release a PO, it essentially means that it's been finalized. So you've gone back and forth with the vendor for a bit, you've negotiated the correct price, all the units look good, the total looks good, they've signed off on it, so you want to release it at that stage. And releasing it just indicates that, okay, it's prepared, you can create an ASN on it, so you can basically start receiving it. So what I can do to create an ASN is I can go Options, Create ASN. And what that does is that allows me to create an advanced shipping notice, which we will then use to receive this PO into the system. So I'm going to click on this PO here, and I can send over the top 2 lines. Let's say I'm only expecting to receive these top 2 lines. I'm not expecting to receive this 3rd line. So I can leave it out of my ASN. So I'm going to send it to my right, and I'm going to create my ASN. Now, at this stage, if you had a packing slip for the shipment that arrived from your vendor, you can enter that packing slip number here. If it didn't, that's okay. You can just leave this blank. We're going to save and create ASN. Click OK, and then click OK. Now, just as a side note, actually, you know what? I'll come back to this point. We'll talk about it in just a sec. So let's actually click on this ASN. And I'm going to scroll down, and now I can actually receive these lines. Now, the ASN you can actually print off. So I'm going to click on Print ASN. Oh, and just as a side note, you can print POs as well. So even when you email your POs out to your vendors, they'll get a copy of this PDF PO. And again, if you need any changes, do let your account manager know if you need any changes on your POs. They'll be sure to make any adjustments if needed. Now, speaking of printing, we've actually printed off our ASN. So your warehousing team, your receiving team can use this ASN document to actually put away all those units that have been received, so they can actually mark the location that it was received into and the quantity that was put away into that location. Then they can come back to the system and actually enter that information into here. So the easiest way I find is you can do a batch receive. So what you can do is simply click on this and you can select a location. Now, depending upon the way your warehouse has been set up, you may have one single location or you may have multiple locations. So you can discuss with your account manager in more detail as to what way is the best way to go about things, if you just need one location or if you require multiple locations. In this case, I have one location here, so I'm just going to select this one and I'm going to hit confirm. So what that is that's going to put away all those units, those 6 and 20 units to this location. And then actually that's going to move the 6 and 20 over to here, this received quantity. All right, so now this remaining quantity has gone to 0, and this is now matching the ASN quantity. So let's say you had under shipments or over shipments. You can handle those as well. You can go line by line to those discrepancies and enter them in. So I can click on the shopping cart here, and let's say instead of 6, I received 4. I'm going to add and close this. And now you can do the same for over receiving as well. You can actually, let's actually do that. Let's close this. Let's say, we didn't receive 20, we actually received maybe 22. It's going to just warn me, and then I can click OK, and there we go. We've received 22. And so this is how you can handle any discrepancies in the lines with under shipments and over shipments. You can just enter them in manually. Otherwise, you can use the batch receive feature to handle all those lines. Now, once you've actually received it in, at this stage, you want to confirm that those, in fact, are the units to the quantities that have been put away. And if everything looks okay, you want to close the ASN. Now, closing the ASN, it's the last important step because it actually increases the inventory in the system. In this case, it's going to increase this line by 4 and increase this line by 22, the SKU, I should say. So once I close an ASN, it's actually going to generate an item receipt for me, a goods receipt. And that item receipt that gets generated will eventually become a bill where it can be paid. So it's important to note that the accounting team won't have to manually create a bill or anything like that. They can just use the goods receipt that was generated automatically when the warehousing team closed the ASN. So we've got our item receipt generated. We've received our inventory. Let's go back to our PO and see this quantity received column. So when I created the ASN, I actually didn't show it, but this quantity in receiving was 6 and 20. And it was showing that because those units were on an ASN. But now that we've closed the ASN, those units have now gone to the received column. Here we've got 4 and 22 because the first line we under-received and the second line we over-received. Now I can repeat this process for additional shipments. Just like we can with sales orders and waves, we can create additional waves on sales orders. If I were to, receive this last line, I can simply click on Create ASN, and it's going to allow me to send the last line and 2 units of the first line because technically the first line isn't fully received yet, and I can basically just repeat the process. So I can actually, let's do that. Send them over to the right. Click on Create ASN. Click OK, and we won't receive it, but we'll just create the ASN, and I'm going to save my PO. And notice how this in receiving column is now showing 2 and 5 because those units are now on an ASN. And also, when we closed our ASN, the status of the PO changed from released to partially received. So that's because these units, they've actually been received. Now it's going to show received in full once these 2 and 5 have been received. So I can go to the ASN center here, and I can actually see all my ASN. So for example, if I wanted to void an ASN, I can do that. I can double click here, for example, the ASN that we just created, and I can use this garbage can to void it. So in case an ASN was accidentally created, you can do that as well. Okay. Now, just as a note, What we just went through was the self-receiving process. So it was a workflow where let's say you're managing your own warehouse, you're doing your own operations, you're doing your own receiving, in which case you do exactly what we just did. You'd create your PO, create the ASN, receive the ASN, and then close it. Now, let's say your warehouse is connected to a 3PL and they manage all your receiving. In that case, just confirm with your account manager that you've got a 3P, like a CSV or an API connection established with them. And if you do, in that case, all you simply have to do is just create the ASN. The receiving and closing part, they would actually manage. They would actually receive those ASNs that you've created, and then check them off, and then close them, send that confirmation back to Xoro. So if they have that connection, that integration established, all you would have to do is create the ASN. Now, if they don't, then you can simply go through the self-receiving workflow that we just went through. You'd create the ASN, receive it, and then close it out. So that's an important note. And again, you can discuss this further with your account manager just to see what it would look like. Okay. Perfect. So let's actually quickly talk about item reconciliation. So I mentioned that item receipt got generated when we closed an ASN. I'll actually show you what that item receipt looks like. Here it is. Here's the item receipt. And again, it looks quite similar to a PO. I do have the option of merging item receipts. So I can merge item receipts from the same vendor and from the same warehouse. What that will do is essentially, let's say you receive your shipments in multiple batches, but the vendor bills you all at once with just one bill. So in that case, you can actually merge the item receipts and then convert that one item receipt to a bill. Talk a little bit more about that in accounting. For now, I just want to mention that when I open this item receipt, I do have the option of doing a reconciliation. So if you were charged freight, customs, or duty, or anything like that to your shipment, you can actually reconcile that cost, dissolve that cost into your landed goods, so that you get an updated average cost, an updated landed cost, I should say, for those goods. So for example, let's say I was charged maybe $100 in freight, or maybe $50 in freight. So what I'll do is I'm going to click on reconcile, and I'll choose my reconciliation currency here. I'm going to select the items that I want to dissolve the cost for. On next, and I'm going to add my freight item that I've set up. So you can have your account manager help set this up for you. Got this here, shipping. And let's say it's not 50, let's say it's 75. Add, and then I'm going to use the cost of this freight, the $75, and I'm going to dissolve it into the landed amount of these two lines here. So I'm going to click on next, click on shipping, and let's dissolve it. Now you have one of three methods that you can dissolve it by. Let's go by amount, and I'm going to select the two items that I want to dissolve it to, and click on calculate. You can see here now it says shipping reconciled successfully. So I'm going to click on next, and then click on here again, and you can see now the landed cost has been updated. Right, it was 15 before. Now with the new freight, it's 17.25. Click on next again, and one important note here, it's going to ask you the freight that you've added, do you want to add it to this bill? If so, leave this checked off, or do you want to create a separate bill for that? If you leave it unticked, it'll actually accrue it as a liability, and you can convert it to a bill later on. So I'm going to untick it, and I'm going to click on finish. And now I'm actually going to select the vendor here, say Canada Post. And I'm going to say shipping accrual. I'm going to click on done. And I think it's assuming the currencies were right for those accounts. And those accounts and vendor is basically how it's going to accrue that liability, that temporary liability. And so now I've actually saved the bill. Now notice, because we accrued it as a separate liability, it wasn't added to the bill. In fact, those third-party charges were actually subtracted. So the bill total stayed the same, but my landed amount has now been updated. And so that's an updated costs to these items. And so this is an optional step that you can do if you want to reconcile that cost of freight or customs or duty or whatever to those items that have been received. You can do this at the item receipt stage or the bill stage, whichever one you prefer. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about prepayments on POs. So going back to the purchase order module for a bit, if you record prepayments for your POs, you can actually have those set up here as well. So what I can do is I can go options and I can go record prepayment. So you may, for example, do a 50% deposit for your vendor POs. In that case, what you'll want to do is record a prepayment at this stage, and then you'll want to apply that prepayment once the PO has become a bill. So it's a two-step process for prepayments. You'll want to record it at the PO stage and then apply it later on when it's a bill. So in this case, let's say we're recording an approximately 50% prepayment. So I'll make this 250. And of that 250, I want to link all of it to this PO. So in this case, I've got to update this amount here. And what this linking is basically it's saying that of this $250, you're linking 250 of it to this PO, which is all of it. So let's say you have multiple prepayments to the same vendor. Instead of creating 2 or 3 separate transactions, separate prepayments, you can just create one lump sum prepayment and then split that amount to all of your different POs. So let's say it's a prepayment worth $10,000. You can put $2,000 toward PO1, $5,000 toward PO2, and $3,000 toward PO3. Right, so that you have that option available to you. So now that I've saved my prepayment, and we'll talk in a later training session about how eventually you can apply that to a bill. You can see here the line, the prepayment, $250. And if I go to the purchase order center, I'm going to pull up prepaid amount, and you can see here $250 has been added. So this is how you can apply a prepayment toward a bill, a PO, and eventually apply it toward a bill. Now let's talk a little bit about vendor credit. So let's say you order something from your vendor, it comes as damaged, or maybe it's incomplete, or maybe it's not as expected, so the vendor is going to issue you a credit. Now, either way, whether you return the goods back to the vendor or if you keep them, if you get issued a credit, you can record that as a vendor credit. So let's go to that module. All right, so in this case, it's pretty simple. Basically, you can select your warehouse, select your vendor, and what you can do is you can add an item. So basically, if I'm returning an item to the vendor, I can select it here. So let's actually do that. I'm going to select the item, click on Add Item. Now I'm going to actually pick it off the shelf because I'm taking it off my inventory and I'm sending it back to them. So let's say 2 were damaged, so I'm going to take 2 off. It's going to automatically total it up here. Here I can, of course, I can add a restocking fee that I was charged, change the unit cost. I can add an expense line too. So let's say that the vendor wants us to keep the units, keep the inventory, and they just want to issue us a credit from scratch. So I can actually add an expense line as well. So here I can basically choose an expense account, and I can add a credit that way as well. So either way will work. The expense line way just doesn't impact inventory. So now if I click on Save, and of course there's additional fields here as well, memo, reference number, and so on. So now this vendor credit can be used toward a future bill for this vendor, and we'll talk a little bit in the accounting training about how that can be done. Okay, let's go to the vendor info module. Now this is really similar to the customer info module if you saw from training 2. It's pretty much the exact same thing, just on the purchasing side of it. So when I select a vendor here, for instance, I can basically see all the transactions for the vendor. I can filter it out. They only want to see bills. I can do that as well. And then I can double click here. right? Just to edit the bills. And of course, there's some additional information about the vendor at the top here. PO info has got all the POs for this vendor as well. And again, you can double click them and so on. The communications tab basically logs all the correspondence with the vendor that's occurred from the Xoro system in this tab here. And the balance on the far right, if you click on this, it'll actually show you how that balance was calculated, including bills, item receipts, credits, prepayments, and so on. So each of these you can actually drill down into. So I can click on the bills due to see, okay, what compromises that 557.50. And I can do this for all of them. The only unique thing here is if you do it for the total, it's actually going to pull up a summarized report and show you how that how each of those are calculated. Okay, so that's the vendor info module, which is pretty handy. Of course, the edit button, I should say, that lets you edit the vendor on the vendor master file. So let's talk a little bit about inventory movements. So in case you wanted to move inventory from one location to another or from one warehouse to another, you can do it immediately with the inventory movement module. So for example, let's say I want to move this SKU from this warehouse, and it's saying that, okay, I can move 77, which just means that the rest remaining on hand are either not available or allocated already. So let's say I want to move it to the LA warehouse, but maybe to another location within the LA warehouse. I can do that. I could have moved it to another warehouse as well, but let's do it from within the same warehouse. Click on Move Inventory, and there we go. You can see now how this is decreased by 2, and this has been increased by 2. So you can use this module to individually move items individually, I should say, over from warehouses or locations. There's another module called the batch inventory module, which does the exact same thing, but it does it in batch with more than one item. So these modules are found right here: movement, batch inventory movement. So for example, let's say I want to move a particular style of an item over. So let's say I do something like this. And let's say, I select these lines right here. Let's say I want to move right now. They're in Vancouver, and these are the units that I can move. Let's say I want to move them to LA. So I can say select batch store and location. Let's move them to LA. Let's move them to this location in LA, and let's say I want to move 2 units of each SKU. And I'm going to click on apply to selected line. So what it's going to do for me, it's going to automatically populate these fields for me. It's going to select the location, the quantities, and the store here. And as long as I leave them selected and click on Move Inventory, it's going to move all 4 of those lines with those quantities over. So you can use the advanced search in this module to pull up all sorts of different SKUs and do all sorts of batch movements. So this is the case. So the last 2 modules we looked at, the batch inventory movement and the inventory movement module, that's in the case where you immediately just want to move some inventory over. So if you've got virtual warehouses and things like that, these are the modules that you'll want to use. However, if you're physically moving inventory from one warehouse to the other, you're using a truck, you might want to consider using transfer orders instead. And when I say transfer orders, there's 2 real options here to get started. You can create a transfer sales order or transfer purchase order. And I'll get to in just a moment how you can use either. Let's start with transfer sales order. And let's say I'm moving inventory from LA to Vancouver. All I have to do is add my SKUs. Sorry, I think we've got it disabled here, but let me use the add item function. And click on add. And there we go. You can see here that it says it's available in the LA warehouse, so I have enough to move to Vancouver. And I'm going to save this, click on OK. And notice how the transfer PO field here gets populated automatically. So what this means is the moment I release this transfer sales order, it's automatically going to generate a transfer purchase order for me. And from then on, the workflow is exactly the same as you would handle the other sales orders and purchase orders. You would create a wave on this transfer sales order, pick it, ship it out, And on the transfer purchase order, you'd create an ASN and then receive it in. So that way you have a record of your transfer that you actually performed, and you'd actually have those receiving and waiving documents to use in the warehouse as well. So these transfer modules you'd use largely to transfer goods from one warehouse to the other, especially handy if you're physically actually transferring them. And the transactions themselves are found within the sales order and purchase order center, just like the rest of the orders. So for example, if I go to the sales order center, I'm going to find my transfer sales order that I created. Here it is, transfer sales order 15. All right. So those are the transfer orders. Let's talk about inventory adjustments. All right, so here's the inventory adjustment module. So you can use this module to correct discrepancies within the system. So for example, let's say you do a cycle count and you realize, okay, you're off by a couple units on some SKUs. You want to use this module to correct that inventory in the system. So what I can do is, okay, I can say, okay, in the LA warehouse, I want to adjust the inventory for this SKU. Let's make the adjustment date this date, and the adjustment account should populate. And let's say we couldn't find some inventory. So I'm going to use the NF reason code, and I'm going to bump this inventory down from 193 to 191. So we actually lost 2 units. We couldn't find those 2 units when we did our count. And let's click on adjust inventory, and there we go. That adjustment's now been made. So in the system now, for this location and this warehouse, we've got 191. The adjustment center is where all the adjustments live. So, and I do want to emphasize that you want to use this module as little as possible. You want to use it only for correcting those minor discrepancies. When you're receiving inventory or shipping out inventory, you still want to use the sales order and purchase order modules for those. All right, let's talk about some reporting now. I'm going to click on the report library. There's a handful of reports that are quite handy. There's basically the aging reports, which we'll get to in the accounting module. But let's talk a little bit about see here, we've got the ATS report. So this is the ATS report. So in addition to the inventory snapshot that we talked about, there's actually the ATS report that shows it in this view as well. So the snapshot's great because you can filter and you can do all kinds of things. But if you want it, like if you want to report in maybe PDF format or something like that, you can always use this ATS report. I think right now it's pulling in a lot of SKUs, but you can get the idea of what it looks like. Basically, it segregates it by style, color, and size, so you can see exactly what your ATS is. You've got an inventory overview report, which is nice. Basically, it shows you your sales and purchase history for all your SKUs. So this is great if you want to see what SKUs are selling well, which ones are maybe not so selling well, and you get a good idea of how those SKUs are performing. The evaluation summary is very handy. This can basically, you can use this report, and actually let's do one thing. I can use this report to enter a SKU in here, tap enter, and then I can click in here, and I can see all the transactions that took place for this SKU. Now in this case, we actually don't have any, so let's actually use this SKU. And I'm going to go back, tap enter, there we go. And here we go. So in this case, there's only 2 transactions on this SKU. But you can imagine for some of your more popular SKUs, you're going to have a whole bunch of transactions listed for them. Credits, bills, adjustments, things like that. So they're all going to get listed here. And this is a great way to see all those transactions for a particular SKU, including a running average cost here on the right, which will show you its historical average cost and maybe how it's been increasing or decreasing over time. So that's a great handy report. Another great report is the PO by delivery date report. So this shows you basically, if you've got some SKUs that you're expecting to receive, it shows you when you're expecting to receive them and what units. So for example, this SKU, I'm expecting to receive 16 units on the 30th of October. So I can click into this 16, and you can see here exactly where those 16 are coming from. And of course, you've got some filters on the right here, which lets you kind of filter those POs out even further. All right, so there's some general out-of-the-box reports that are available in your reporting library. And of course, these are in addition to the reports that you can generate from the centers, where you can export the data and then manipulate that data with Excel and build your own reports. So let's talk a little bit about manufacturing to end the training off. Now, if you're not subscribed to the manufacturing modules, if you won't be using them, then this training won't apply to you, obviously. But if you have, then you can proceed here. So what we can do is, the way manufacturing works is you'll need to create your bill of materials, your BOMs, basically, the recipe for how you manufacture your finished goods. And you can do that by using the bill of material module. So here you can actually select your finished good and basically add all your raw materials and then click Save to create your BOMs. Now, if you have a lot of BOMs and you're getting onboarded, you can provide us a CSV file with all those BOMs and we can upload those so that way you're not creating the BOMs individually one by one. So you can speak to your account manager about this. They'll already have a template ready for you in case you have a lot of BOMs to set up in the system. And as you create BOMs, they'll populate in the BOM center. You can see here, so all my BOMs I've got set up. Now you can then use those BOMs to create manufacturing orders or work orders. So I'm going to create a manufacturing order here for a BOM that I've already set up for this SKU. And it fetched this BOM here by default. And let's say I want to produce one of this finished good. So it actually fetched in the lines for the BOM, the recipe at the bottom here. So it said, I need a neck trim, I need this hang tag, and so on. So I'm going to save this manufacturing order. I have the ability to assign this MO to other people. There's a printout that's involved too. So there's actually a full process that you'll have to go through in order to manufacture this item. So once I save it, I'm going to release it. And you can see here that there is inventory available on the raw materials, which is good because I'll need all the raw materials in order to make this finished good. And you want to make sure that when you're setting up your BOMs, you're adding your raw goods as if you're making one of the finished good. So you're going to add your raw materials, the quantities that you need in order to make one finished good. And the reason you say that is because you can always adjust the manufacturer order quantity. So let's say you wanted to make 10. This factor here would then be times 10. So it'd be actually, you'd need to pick 10 here on both rows. So I'm going to actually start picking now. Click on OK. And here we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick my raw materials. So I can simply fulfill my lines here. And I can say pick complete. So I've got them all together. And now I'm at the work in progress stage, which basically means I'm actually assembling my finished good. I'm putting it together. I'm using up my raw materials to create that item. And what I can do is I can select my location that I'm eventually going to put my finished good away to, and I can simply hit produce. Now, the moment I hit produce, what's going to happen is those raw materials are going to get depleted out of the system because they are now used up. And the finished good inventory is going to go up by 1 because we're producing 1 here. So I can click on produce, click OK. And there we go. We've got our finished good that's been produced and our MO that's got a produced status. So if I go to the manufacturing order center, you can actually see the MO that we've got produced here in a produced status. You also have several options available to you. You can quick produce here as well. So, if let's say you don't want to go through that step-by-step process for all your MOs, you can quickly produce them. So you can take them from an open status all the way to a produced status right away. And of course, the manufacturing orders do have financial transactions associated to them. So those all get taken care of automatically as you're going through the manufacturing process. All right, so that takes us to the end of training 3. I believe I'm just going through my notes here to make sure I've covered everything and everything looks good. Okay, so we'll all talk to you soon and have a good one.